Welcome to Drupal Night, sponsored by BioRAFT. Tonight we have JP McNeal, known as peezy on D.O, and he's going to talk about amping up your Drupal site. Take it away.
All right. Thanks. Don't clap yet. No. So we just went around the room and did introductions, and I'm going to do the same. Also, I'm JP McNeal on Twitter. I'm not peezy on Twitter. That's some hip-hop artist. I don't know. Maybe I'll get peezy Drupal one day. I'm not sure. But don't mention peezy on Twitter unless you... he's been mentioned with Drupal. He's probably very confused about what he has to do with websites. And also, I'm based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I'm currently self-employed, and I co-organize the Seacoast Drupal meetup. And we usually meet the first Thursday of the month, except for tonight when we all carpool down here. It was just me. But there's a lot going on in New Hampshire and in New England with Drupal. So I don't make it down here as often as I want to. So I was really excited when Michelle asked if I wanted to present, and I'm always happy to talk. So a little bit more about me. I'm pretty geeky. If you can't already tell by my affinity for Drupal and stuff. In fact, just in case you weren't sure, here's an official geek cred. This is my certificate of an award in Programming Basic from Computer Camp. So actually it gets geekier than this. So this was officially a tennis and computer camp.
Double threat.
So it's like, oh wait, we're gonna send your middle school kids, but don't worry, they'll get outside sometimes and play tennis. However, the tennis portion consisted of a counselor sticking his head in the computer lab saying, "Anybody want to play tennis? No? Okay." I didn't pick up a racket the entire week of tennis/computer in 1989. I can't even remember. I think I built Breakout or something close to Breakout with Basic, which was pretty fun. And a little more geek cred. This is more recent. I don't know how well you can see that, but that is a ticket to see Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's not the bard of the geeks, but definitely super geekdom. And I really have this weird smile on my face because that 2B on the ticket is second balcony. We're pretty high up. But seeing Neil deGrasse Tyson, I love space. When I was a kid, the first thing I wanted to be was an astronaut. So seeing him speak earlier this week was incredible. Another thing that's pretty geeky that I do is I listen to podcasts, and I know we have a podcast engineer in the house tonight. But this is this is my favorite podcast that's not related to Drupal, and it's called This Week in Google. But it doesn't just follow Google; it's really This Week in the Cloud. So they talk about Twitter, Facebook, kind of web stuff in general. It's a good thing because sometimes in the Drupal world, we tend to just listen to each other, and not that Drupal podcasts are bad. I definitely encourage everyone to listen to Talking Drupal. But sometimes it's good to see what else is going on in the world. So this actually wasn't the first time I heard about AMP, but it was the first really solid discussion about it in December of 2015. And this is a link at the bottom, so we'll upload all the slides, and there's a lot of these red things with underlines in them that will link you to it. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about AMP and implementing it on your Drupal sites, then definitely check this out, especially if you are interested in some of the criticisms, because there are some about AMP and what it's all about. Also, you can follow the Santa tracker, apparently. So just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about. Obviously, AMP. We're going to amplify your site. There will be lots of puns. Do a quick demo, and hopefully have some time for questions. Somebody keep an eye on time. Give me a chicken wing or something. One of those.
Well, Oscar's music you off.
This is as rude as I want people to get, okay? But let me know if I start to get over on time. So the folks behind this, Google is they created the accelerated mobile pages project because, well, for several reasons, but also if you hear about Drupal and AMP, you're going to hear some things about Lullabot because they are the ones who have spearheaded the development. That there are others involved, but they were the main players in the AMP module and the AMP theme, and they work hand in hand. So that's kind of who's behind all of this. So the other piece of AMP is they're called technology partners, and most of them are publishers. So if you are interested in that link at the bottom shows all of them. But these are publishers who are using AMP already. So like the Washington Post, The Guardian, and BBC were early adopters, and other apps like Nuzzle, they use it. A lot of folks who aren't even on this screen, Vox is if you've seen a Vox article, you've probably seen an AMP page and you don't even know it. Twitter is a partner in that so there's two kinds. So there's the publishers are using the AMP project, and then things like Twitter, Brightcove, they're allowing their content to be ampable, I guess is the best way to say it. So you can embed tweets, embed YouTube videos. Of course, it's Google, right? So obviously YouTube videos work with AMP. But I think it's interesting that the ones that are in the red circle, these are these are people who sponsored by companies like Washington Post is big with Amazon. So it's not just about Google, all right? So please keep that in mind. OpenX is the largest open ad platform. So even if you're in, Google's ads can be a part of AMP, but others can too. So it's not just Google. So let's pretend you are this person who is waiting for the bus, and you are trying to pull up a mobile site on your phone. You don't have Wi-Fi, and that's pretty important. And then something like this happens where you get, oh, look, a pop-up, and then there's a third-party integration comes, and by the time you get to the content of the mobile site itself, you've missed the bus. So everyone has had a bad mobile site experience, right? I mean, and hopefully you don't have it on your own site, but the mobile web is fraught with challenges, and so that's kind of why Google came up with AMP, is to help solve some of these problems. So there are other reasons as well. Another big one is the walled garden. So a couple of companies that you may have heard of have come up with products that are news-based, and people have access to them, but only through their apps. So Apple's news app, there's certain things that at first you had to be invited. You had to have a special invitation to them to get to them. And Google said, well, why don't we have a similar thing where people can get fast, get news, get information very quickly, but we're going to make it open. And it is free. It's on GitHub. People can contribute to the AMP project, and obviously Google's engineers are the main contributors, but you can't do the same thing with Instant Articles or with Apple News. In fact, I think that Instant Articles has gradually started to become more open. I'm not sure how if anyone in this room could actually be an Apple News provider. I think that's still pretty closed. But you can?
Provider of
Yeah, to Apple News you can. Okay, sweet, good. They're starting to open up. That's awesome. But one thing you cannot do is I can't pull up my Apple News unless I have the News app. And Facebook News, you also have the Facebook News app. So those are two kind of still kind of closed systems, if you will. So where the heck can I see? I've talked for a little bit. Let's see if we can see where to do this. So all I do is I have this is just Chrome and I have my DevTools open so I can emulate a mobile device here because that's what it's all about. Wow, that just got really small. Boom. All right, so let's pick a news topic that doesn't have anything to do with the election. Can anyone think of one? All right, so I did Pokemon Go earlier, but
All clowns.
all right. All right, here we go. So all I'm doing is a Google search for clowns. Did I get booted from the Wi-Fi? It says I'm still connected to plug 2. Can we have some traveling music, please? Maybe I'll search for one of the things I already searched for, because it might be cache. Sorry, Steve. No. What other Wi-Fi networks are people connected to?
Plug 5.
Plug 5. Let's try that one. There is no internet. Okay, here we go. So you see this little top stories thing, and lower my DevTools a bit. You notice I got an NBC thing, I got this VentureBeat thing, but right under the title here, oh look, it says AMP. And there's a little lightning bolt. It might be hard to see on the screen, but yes, it is a lightning bolt. And this is called the carousel. You may have seen it before, or you may not have, but these are all AMP pages. And when I go to, I guess, wow, the 5th nest migration just happened. I don't know what that means. But all right, let's click on it. It's Pokemon Go Hub. You notice that somebody figured out, look, if you have an image that's a logo, you get a branded. If you don't get a brand. So let's click on this. All right, came out pretty fast. Pretty simple site, image. But if you notice at the top, there's also this menu slider thing. So if I were to swipe, I'm swiping to the next story, I get it instantly. It's because it's cached. So does anyone notice anything interesting about the URL? That's something else to note.
Does not change.
So this is because as part of AMP, you get a free CDN. So that's the good news. So one of the I guess critiques is that, all right, so this isn't my URL. My actual site is what it begins right here with en.rocketnews. So, but the URL of this is a cached version of this article from Google's CDN, Content Delivery Network, and that's what I'm looking at right now. I haven't actually visited en.rocketnews.24.com. If I want to, I can. I'm just going to click. You just click the. Now I'm here on their site, but here I'm on, and you should be able to get to the story somehow. Well, often you can get to the story by clicking right on the story. So that's how you can kind of see AMP. And if I did the same, let me switch. So I'm no longer emulating a mobile device. So let's search for Pokemon Go. So I still get this top stories thing, but notice it looks a little bit different. There's no lightning bolt. So it knows you're on a mobile device. It's reading the user agent, of the device that's doing the search, and it's adapting it because of it. So so you can click here and you can go to a news. You're going to the news thing here. So that's how you see it. Also, it was recently announced that Bing is going to start supporting AMP in its search results as well. Thought that was kind of interesting. So you'll be able to see it there too. So what is it all about? So accelerated mobile pages. I already said that. There's basically the 3 components to that. There's 3 components to basically every website that exists now: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But so I've kind of put HTML in there with that CSS. So it's the AMP cache, which is that CDN that I kind of mentioned. So if you want to see the official docs, go to those links, ampproject.org, and also that's the GitHub repository. So we'll start with the HTML. The best word is the one that's air quoted, is that it's a subset of HTML. It is not. It'll look really familiar, and we will take a look at it. Most of the tags are the same, but there's some things that have special AMP components. Is the best way to do it. So it's also not just we're talking about news a lot, so I just do want to say that it's not just necessarily for news sites. In fact, when I first installed the AMP theme, I made it did what I usually do with Drupal sites, right? You make it your default theme. And I was like, oh, my site is amped. Well, the site was completely amped. But what most use cases for AMP is to have the AMP theme only render this AMP content, and you keep the rest of your site. And I already kind of talked about how it's not really just Google. So let's take a look at some actual AMP stuff. So this is straight from the ampproject.org. They have I highly recommend you just go through their it's a quick tutorial. I think it's called My First AMP page. These comments are mine, just to kind of help you see. So right off the bat, you see that there's this lightning bolt thing. So you can put that in, or you can just use HTML AMP in the HTML tag. And the head, we'll just kind of go through. I'll hit the highlights for this. So head tag is required. You should probably already have one anyway. But in the meta tag is required, and if you don't meet these requirements, by the way, you are not going to be you get kicked out of the carousel and stuff, because they really want it to be consistent. So they also have, for every AMP page, there has to be a link to the canonical URL for that page content. And I've found out that you don't need to do a sitemap, an XML sitemap of any of your AMP content, because if you have this rel link, Google will find you. It's good at finding you, actually. That's one of the things it does really well.
So what does canonical mean?
So canonical means it's like the URL for this piece of content. So a canonical URL, for example, if you can have your canonical URL could be www.mywebsite.com, or it could be mywebsite.com. So you kind of need to pick one or the other. So that's an example of a canonical URL. It's somewhere that this is the legitimate, real path for this content.
So like the super official one.
Yes, super official. That's one way to do it.
Would you put your alias or your go ID?
So, good question. I think it will. Well, so we won't actually be editing this at all. This will be taken care of. So if you have an AMP version of in the Drupal world, if you add a question, if you add a query string for the URL, it will serve up. That's how it'll work. And I'll show you how that will work. And then your source will already be. It'll be the path, the official path, I think. So we can test it out too, just double check. And you got to have the viewport the meta tag, and you have to, and they recommend you use this exact one.
I'll make a point about the canonical. So for
Do it.
SEO, you'll get penalized if you have duplicate pages within your website with the same exact content. And putting canonical on it is the way Google lets you get away with that. So if you have 3 pages with the same content, you could have one page be the canonical source. And as long as the other 2 point to that page with that canonical reference, you won't get penalized for having duplicate content. And an AMP page is duplicate content.
Yes.
So that's why they want you to use that.
Thank you. I'm glad you chimed in with that. So this style tag here, we'll talk about scripts in a little bit. But this style tag and all this visibility hidden, blah, 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 all that stuff, that comes from AMP. And it's required. This is the AMP project provides this CSS, and you have to include it. And this is the script tag that loads the AMP.js library. Not only is it required, it's got to be last in your head tag. It's very important. Body tag, guess what? It's required. So this is that is a basic, the most basic of AMP pages. So let's look at some media. And can everybody see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Let's look at this article 2. So some more stuff, right? We got good old AMP lightning bolts. All right, so here's an image. It's an AMP image. This is a new tag. It's not an image tag, it's an AMP image tag. And it's also recommended that you style this so that in case the image fails, you can have you'll have something there other than just white space. And you also, the way that the reason for this, and one of the reasons for this is if the image fails, it will still let the page load for you, and it'll still load quickly. So if you have an animated image, so let's say you have a GIF, you're going to use this special amp-anim tag, and notice it has a placeholder in case the image fails. So it's got a fallback, and you'll see there's fallbacks within fallbacks of things. And in order to use this, you got to have in a couple of these other tags, you have to have additional scripts. So this script async custom element here, you have to have that script tag if you have animated images. And similarly, if you want an AMP audio, my scrolling has issues. So here's what a video tag, guess what? It's amp-video. So you can see that these are some of those new tags that you have. And by the way, it has to be HTML5 videos, and you should have a fallback for every HTML5 video. So there you go. There's also the audio file. Guess what? It's an AMP audio tag. Notice that AMP videos don't need another script in the head, but AMP audios do. And iframes. Iframes are interesting because, again, we have one of those unique AMP tags. And there are a few other rules too. So one way to get around it's possible to get around the AMP rules if you embed another page within the AMP page. So they have you can only do HTTPS, and also you have to it may not be the same origin as the container, so you have to embed something that's outside your AMP page. Otherwise, it would just be an AMP page, right? So, so does that make sense? Oh, and they also have this strange rule about 600 pixels wide, 600 pixels or 75% below basically below. It needs to be below the fold. It can't be towards the top of the page. Again, because it load for loading reasons. It can't be at the top. Or at least that's what they tell us. So why does it have all this crazy stuff? So it's all about performance. It delays the resource, and it's also there's a lot more information about why they do all this and why they have all these replacement tags instead of using HTML at that link. All right, so good old CSS. Let's look at some CSS. This one also has some, guess what, funkiness happening. So we have the AMP boilerplate styles here, right? That's all. And this, what I did here is I just copied all the code from a page from the AMP theme. So this is a Drupal AMP page, and I just pasted it here. So here we get into below the boilerplate, you have a style tag with AMP custom, and this is where all your custom styles must go. Can't have them anywhere else; they won't get loaded.
So no external CSS files.
No, but if you're using Sass, that should not, in theory, be a problem because the way that you can set up the AMP base theme, the AMP sub theme, so that it basically has a twig template. And so you can use gulp or something else to compile to this twig template so that you're still writing in Sass and it just compiles to this twig template, which gets loaded. And I can show you this. It just gets loaded here and gets put here. So you're not actually writing inline styles. You can still be writing good old Sass, which everyone needs to be writing anyway. So I'm not going to go through all this. Well, this is all from the sub theme, all the CSS. That's it. And this is content.
What about JavaScript? Because from what I heard that AMP requires all JavaScript to be async, and does it do it automatically for you, or it is the theme developer you need to make it happen?
So there is no external JavaScript allowed. There's certain JavaScript libraries that you can include.
Okay.
So it depending on what you want to do. So in the Guardian is a good example of this. So the Guardian's AMP site, AMP articles, there's no menu. It's just the Guardian logo and maybe some hard-coded LIs. So there's no drop down and swooshes and all this JavaScript stuff because the idea is just to be fast, lean, mean. And it does support some things like there is a carousel, and not the AMP carousel. I mean, you could have your own slider basically in there, but you have to use Google's JavaScript from the CDN. So a few other things. I just talked about that. So other thing about CSS that's important. There are certain things that are no-nos. So you can't have inline style. You can't use important. So the only other style sheet you can have is custom fonts. So and actually there's only a few of them that you can use because they got to be fast. Can't use the star. Can't use the not. So pseudo selectors you can't use the ones that start with the AMP dash. Because otherwise you could do things like have, whatever is not an AMP image do this. And there are a few exceptions to that as well. And I've never used Moz binding or behavior, but apparently there's security issues there, so that's good. AMP class, a few more rules about that. So JavaScript, a little bit more about the JavaScript. Was there a question about the CSS?
No, I'm actually going all the way back to canonical.
Oh, okay.
I've been thinking about this. So, using this in a Drupal site, would you have 2 URLs for every piece of content that you'd like brought up? Or would you be able to say, at this breakpoint, serve up this theme instead?
So the way Dries kind of talked about this, or made a blog post about this, I can't remember, that you know how the web, it's kind of like the way that the web has changed in the past, I don't know, 2 years, the new thing about the web is that the web is no longer a site that we go to. The web is content that comes to us through a Google search, in this case, through a tweet, through all of this. So this AMP content is less something that someone would go to. It probably won't. A person would probably never actually go to, and that's, would go to google.com or would go to question mark AMP for the query string. No one would actually physically go to that. They would get this content only through Google.
Can I answer
So,
that? From whatever I know so far, is that there is a separate URL from whatever I understand. So
Yes.
app content is a totally separate URL, and the person who link to need to know your AMP URL to use the AMP URL. And because it is through Google, Google is actually, when you search for this word, it is AMP enabled, that is showing that lightning thing because it is already knows about it, so it is always serving you only the AMP URL. But similarly, other search engine can change that way. But the person who is linking to you has to do specifically that AMP URL. It doesn't come automatically.
Right. But you could still visit it.
Yeah.
Most people probably wouldn't.
So if I have a Drupal site that has a bunch of great articles on it, that the majority of the time, my people actually are navigating there via the desktop computer or whatever. In order for that information to then show up in search results the way that you demonstrated, I need to have 2 URLs with the same content, one being the AMP one. And how do you accomplish that so that it can suck it in and then eventually maybe send people off if they want to click through?
That probably
I'll show you.
Exactly.
Okay.
I will show you, and we will keep digging until we get it. So
I have a question. Does it require when you have the second page that it's in an AMP path, or can your path be anything on your site?
I don't know if you can, within the Drupal world, you can have, there's a specific query, the query string, a path that they want.
Okay.
That kind of triggers, because basically we're generating a display mode for this node.
Okay, I see.
Okay, so that may have been the,
Light bulb.
that may have been the key. Yeah, so we're going to create a display mode. So the content will still exist on the node. The node still exists. The node is still there, don't worry.
Okay.
We're just having triggering a different display mode based on a query string
Okay.
in a URL.
It's all coming together.
Yes, it will. I love it when things come together. So these JavaScript libraries exists in the cloud, so you don't have to. So that's one of the reasons it's super fast too, because it's all from that place. Oh, so here's what you can have. The social embeds, those exist as well, so that's important. That cache, kind of already touched on it, but the one thing I didn't really say is that you have to have the schema.org set up, and good news, Drupal lets you have that. That's a requirement to be on the carousel. So the end result is things are fast and loud. But not necessarily apocalyptic. So how do we use this in Drupal? How do we build these display modes? So there's 2 really good posts. They are a bit old. Drupal 8, a couple of us were talking earlier, Drupal 8 development is still happening, especially in the contrib space. So unfortunately, sometimes the project documentation doesn't keep up, and also sometimes the blog posts about the project's documentation also don't keep up. So keep that in mind when you read this, because they talk about downloading this Composer module. Don't do that. Just use Composer. And if you haven't already, definitely maybe, I don't know. Can't really go into Composer too much here, other than to say that that's the best way to get there is to use this link right here to learn more about using Composer in Drupal. But the first step is to install the AMP module with, and I would use it with Composer. And the reason to use Composer is basically just a dependency manager for PHP projects. And Drupal is written in PHP and integrates super well with it's kind of it will be the go-to way to install a lot of Drupal 8. Well, I guess they're more than modules because, I mean, I'm pretty sure Commerce 2.0 is, almost all of it is Composer. It's all a library. You don't just download a ton of modules. So you download this module, and then one of the dependencies of the AMP module is the AMP PHP library. That's the thing that Lullabot put a lot of work into. So once you have that, then you can have the AMP theme. That includes the example theme. That's not my pun. But you need to install that. And you can install that the normal way. It's a theme. So I don't know why this is at the bottom of the page, and I'll show you the config page. But test that AMP is configured properly. It should be at the top. It's actually like way down at the bottom near the save button. So actually click that first, because if you don't have a library, you're going to be kind of confused. And these other two buttons are also kind of important for you when you're starting out, because it'll tell you what's wrong. You can enable debugging, and they also, I don't know, whenever I see a power user checkbox, I check it. And what this does is that it basically will try to fix say you have an inline style in your body field accidentally, which sometimes happens. Sometimes it's actually intentional. It will try to fix it for you. It'll try to strip out that inline style, which you probably want because you want to be included in the CDN and the carousel and all that good stuff. So we'll try to fix stuff for you. Next, you're going to go to the content type. You're going to configure the content type, but the good news is you can do that on the configuration page for the module. So you can select, and by default, when you install Drupal, you get article and basic page. So it will list, if you have super AMP page as one of your content types, that will appear here too. And all these these are links to your display settings for these content types. And this is the theme to use when it's amped. And so the example sub-theme is the one that came with it, so that's one I picked. So this is another thing. This issue may have been fixed. It wasn't as of a couple weeks ago. But I did all the stuff. I had everything working right. Everything was groovy. But then some strange craziness was happening. And the reason is that the logo, theme logos in Drupal 8 are SVGs by default. So for some reason, the AMP example sub-theme didn't like that it was an SVG, and there's an issue about it. So I just changed it to a non-SVG and it seemed to work. So now we're going to switch. We're leaving sort of the AMP module configuration land, going to the content type configuration page. So, so you have to create a custom display for your AMP content. And so in this box is there, AMP, check it, and then you test by visiting the URL with the question mark AMP query string. So let's take a look at this, which hopefully will help. So here we have my AMP demo page with the amplifier. Bartik should look familiar to pretty much everybody. So let's I'm at the home page. Let's go to see if this is an article. If it amps, so question mark amp. It's loading. This is just the default example. Notice that my logo went away. Excuse me, not went away, but it got all different. So let's inspect, just to double check that it looks like an AMP page I have theme debugging on. So yeah, you can see how HTML AMP is here. Let's open head tag. Oh, they have changed it a bit. It's the AMP runtime. Style. Here's the AMP boilerplate styles. Here's the custom styles. All in line. I'm going to go back to the node. Should. Regular old HTML tag. So let's take a look at that configuration page. How are we doing on time? No one's giving me a chicken wing, so I think.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. Ignore the red, that's what I always do.
What rate?
Exactly. I just haven't updated in a little while. So this is where, I have a Hello World article content type. So you can do things like insert your AdSense stuff, your Google Analytics, pixels. So if you do much tracking stuff, advanced tracking stuff, you'll see that. And of course I have the power user. Here's that magic button. I think this should be at the top, but maybe I'll create an issue for it. Maybe I won't. Okay, so just real quickly, I wanted to, and then we'll do questions. There are a lot of critiques, and here are probably the top ones. Our Google overlords. So I've gone back and forth, like I think a lot of people have, about AMP. So the speed thing is great, but I was a little hesitant. My biggest personal critique is actually this number 2, is that it's not part of the web standards. There's these tags that aren't really real. So that's one thing, but I guess I kind of can't come to peace with that. I've made peace with that because it still is making the web fast, and at least it's an open solution. Sure, there are more open solutions, and maybe they will become part of the standards at some point. I don't know, but I think it's more open than some of the other news and speedy things that the other companies are doing. This is a legitimate critique as well. When the carousel Google results, that's the top. So 5, with going back to the m.dot world, you're actually not having separate contents and separate versions of your site. So it's a display mode for your content, and it's so. And this link is, they have a discussion, really good discussion on that podcast. So just a quick wrap up. The one thing this article just came out a couple of days ago, that the results aren't really your site, and this guy was installed, did AMP for his blog post, and he noticed that hey, this isn't my URL. And hey, this traffic is not coming to my site; it's going to the cached version of the site. So he wrote this blog post, and someone on the AMP tech lead replied to it. And so, if you want to know more about that, or if you are, debating whether or not to do this, I recommend you check that out. And also the CSS tricks. They did some performance testing on it, and sort of this person's real use case scenario for using AMP. Cool, that's it. We have no more puns. We've exited pun land, unless they happen to come up in questions. Michelle.
The second to last one, can we go back?
Certainly.
I already forgot what it was.
The m.dot? Oh. The second to last critique?
Second to last bullet point on the last page. There we go. Not your site one.
Yes.
So, what was that person's concerns about it coming from the Google URL? Just because you can't do Google Analytics, if you're still able to put inline, ads and things like that in your content, you still potentially could get revenue if that's your revenue stream. Is it just the analytics part?
Yeah, that was. And I'm pulling up this article that was really great, and I just read it when I was across the street. But because I'm like, what? I should see what's new with AMP lately. So yeah, he and actually at another time when I talked about this at NetCamp, one time at NetCamp when I talked about this, someone brought up the URL thing too. So some people really have this idea of their web property, you know, and in theory, this person can go and his thing was, okay, when you visit this, his site, you know, when you search for 9 tips or whatever, for get tips, you get this X, and he was saying that he expected, so this is his amped version, so when someone clicked that X, instead of going to his homepage to see more content, they went back to the search results page. So his point was that it's kind of reworking the way that Google used to work. You would go to Google, search for a thing, and you'd leave Google. You go to this person, you go to a different site. You get off Google very quickly. That was actually one of their key points, was to make the search, you know, make the Google homepage super easy, super transparent to get away from. You're no longer in Google when you leave the search results page. His thing is that they kind of reworked that. So you don't really leave Google when you go to the carousel. You're still in Google land, even though it's a free cache CDN that brings up a super speedy site. So that was his, I think that was his main concern. Tracking still does work.
Because it's got the embedded URL.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, tracking still works if you have everything set up the right way. And that was what the AMP tech lead brought up. He's like, hey, you still get traffic, you know, ads. I had trouble finding this article because every article I found was, hey, publishers are super happy about this. Search, you know, traffic is up for AMP pages because people want that. You know, people will vote with their feet, you know, or in this case with their eyeballs. You know, if something is fast and they're waiting for that bus, they will go to whatever's fastest. So I think that, and I don't think he talked about the search results. This is that quote that I said. So let's make the web great again. Came out before a certain person, I did not say his name, came. So yeah, here's where he says you would search Google, find interesting stuff, go to their site. Now you search Google, find interesting stuff, and then you read more content without even leaving Google. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Let's go.
Can I? Sorry.
Yes, sir.
I think we all
You
did
get
the same thing at the same time. So thank you for this, because actually I read this article a couple of days ago when it appeared on the web.
Oh, cool.
And so I had questions related to this. So I'm happy you brought it up. Speaking of walled gardens, I'm one of those who say, oh, my content, and not so much for myself, for myself as well, if I still publish blog posts, which I haven't done in a year, but for my clients as well. I mean, I think some of my clients are more aware of or more have this idea that their content is their property, or at least they're a little protective of it. And the idea of sort of delegating to Google the serving of this content is a little frightening. I'm frightened for them. Maybe they don't know about AMP yet, but when they do, if they ever do, I'm starting to be frightened for them. I
And that's a legitimate complaint. You know, that's a legitimate point.
So I still think it's a bit of a walled garden, even though it's not app-based. I'm an Apple fan, but I'm not happy about what they've done with Apple News, because you still go through one of their URLs. Like if I share an some content from Apple News, I still share an apple.news URL, and I don't think that's good for the web. And if I'm sort of jumping, I have notes here, so I'm sort of jumping through things you said, and you said, you know, we used to think of the web as a site, as this website we go to, and then another website we go to. And I still do think of the web that way, especially because I make the web. I make websites, and I think my clients think of the web that way. They don't want people to live their site.
Yeah.
If you know it's about not owning content and not owning eyeballs, but at least about creating an experience, a user experience really that's about keeping your visitors, keeping your audience as much as possible, as comfortable as possible in your website. So if you stop thinking about the web as a network of websites, but as a collection of content that is always served by Google or Facebook or Apple, we lose the sense of the web as this open network of content that we create and that's enriched by its own diversity. If everything is served by Google, we lose the diversity, we lose the feeling of not so much ownership, but of identity of the person or the people who create a certain type of content or a certain piece of content. So many things.
This is
I'll,
good.
I'll keep it short. What happens? One of my worries is link rot, because what happens when Google decides to go for a different URL scheme?
Google changes products?
Right? What happens? Sorry?
Google Reader.
What
excuse me.
happens? Google Reader, Google Wave. I'm one of those who use
yeah.
it. I found it kind of interesting, but it disappeared. But we're not just producing content as static, so to speak, content. We're also, with Drupal, we're producing interactive features, and it's interesting that you use that GIF. I think it was a GIF of the guy trying to look for a bus schedule. Bus schedules are no longer simple static pages, but they're often enough when they work interactive features, and I don't think AMP can serve that kind of stuff, especially. I mean, so these are all issues that I'm raising and that worry me when I see this. I appreciate the idea of faster pages, but if we as designers and developers of websites are already mobile aware, we should not have pages like that one that we shouldn't, that pops up, that, where you have all these pop-ups and bad mobile experience. We should already be aware of that and should already be doing something about that. So.
Yeah, and those are some great points. Let's make a blog. Let's write a blog. we should write a blog post.
I have notes. We should.
I think I would have a lot less problem with AMP, and I think others too, if it was some consortium of the World Wide Web or some other nonprofit thing. Oh, sorry. I have suspend never, but never is very short. So to have maybe a nonprofit of some kind to be able to have it not be a Google sponsored project, but not live under Google, because they definitely have they have a competitive interest in search result. Obviously, so to have something that's to spin it off in some way to a nonprofit would be kind of cool, and then that would change the URL to be
something decentralized as well.
Yes,
because the free CDN is not really free, is it? So I mean, we're giving something up for that.
So the other thing is you can use it. I could make the example theme my theme and just have a site, and have that be my webpage if I wanted to. And also, I don't have to use. I get picked up by the CDN, but I could also use my own personal CDN to serve this stuff. So yeah, all legitimate points. Okay, we are going to wrap up at least the video portion of the telecast. So thank you all very much, and I'll hang around here for a little while to continue the other additional questions that people may have.
Thank you.